Don't let your father sign that deal unless you want to watch his empire collapse. The words hit Emily Whitmore harder than the orchestra music echoing beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Grand Regent Hotel ballroom. She turned sharply, startled to find a small black girl standing beside her with a silver tray balanced carefully against one arm. The girl couldn't have been older than 13. Her catering uniform hung slightly loose around her shoulders, and her curly hair was tied back beneath a plain black headband. But her eyes were steady, too steady for a child surrounded by billionaires, senators, and executives worth more money than entire towns. Emily glanced down at the folded note now pressed into her palm. Before she could speak, the girl stepped backward into the sea of servers moving silently between tables draped in white linen and gold candlelight. Across the ballroom, her father stood near the elevated stage shaking hands with Victor Kane, the man every financial magazine in America had been calling the architect of the decade's biggest merger. Richard Whitmore looked exactly like the headlines described him. Tall, controlled, untouchable. His charcoal suit fit like armor beneath the warm amber lights, and every person around him leaned in slightly when he spoke, as if even his silence carried authority. The giant digital screen behind him displayed one number in silver letters. $800 million. Emily slowly unfolded the note beneath the tablecloth. Her stomach tightened instantly. Clause 8 transfers all federal liability to Whitmore Holdings. He's being set up. Her breath caught. For a second, the sounds around her faded into a dull blur of clinking glasses and muffled conversations. She looked back across the room, searching for the girl again. Their eyes met briefly through the moving crowd. The child gave the smallest shake of her head, almost pleading. Then someone suddenly spoke beside Emily. Beautiful event, isn't it? Victor Kane's voice was smooth and polished like expensive marble. Emily forced a smile, quickly folding the paper closed. Up close, Victor looked even more intimidating than he did on television. Silver cufflinks. Perfect smile. Calm eyes that never stopped calculating. Your father built something remarkable, he continued. Tonight changes everything for your family. Emily nodded slowly, but her fingers tightened around the note until the paper bent at the edges. On stage, Richard Whitmore accepted a crystal pen from one of his attorneys while photographers crowded closer near the velvet rope. Flashbulbs exploded across the ballroom like bursts of lightning. Ladies and gentlemen, the host announced through the speakers, the signing of the Whitmore Kane International acquisition will begin in just moments. Applause rolled across the room. Emily's heart pounded harder. She looked down at the contract binder resting near the champagne glasses beside her father's seat. Clause 8. Her pulse raced as she stepped toward the stage. Then she heard it. Miss, you're not supposed to be here. One of the security guards had grabbed the young catering girl gently by the arm near the back corridor. Several guests turned immediately, some annoyed, others curious. The little girl didn't resist. She simply looked directly at Richard Whitmore standing beneath the chandelier light and said in a calm voice that somehow cut through the entire ballroom, "My father died trying to warn people about Victor Kane." The room went silent. The silence inside the ballroom felt unnatural, like the entire building had stopped breathing at once. Richard Whitmore slowly lowered the crystal pen from his hand while every executive, investor, and reporter turned toward the small catering girl standing near the service hallway. The soft glow from the chandeliers reflected against the marble floor beneath her worn black shoes, making her look even smaller inside a room built for powerful people. One of the security guards tightened his grip on her arm. "Sir, should we remove her?" he asked quietly. Richard did not answer immediately. His sharp gray eyes stayed locked on the girl's face. "What did you just say?" His voice was calm, but the tension beneath it spread through the room like cold air before a storm. The girl swallowed once before speaking. "My father tried to expose Victor Kane. 5 years ago," she said. 3 weeks later, he died." A low murmur rolled across the ballroom. Cameras immediately lifted. Phones appeared in people's hands beneath the tables. Victor Kane laughed softly, smooth and dismissive. "Richard, this is ridiculous. She is a child looking for attention." But Emily noticed something. For the first time that evening, Victor's smile looked forced. Richard stepped down from the stage slowly, polished shoes clicking against the marble. "What is your name?" he asked. "Maya Carter." "And who let you into this event, Maya?" She hesitated. "I work catering on weekends." Some guests exchanged uncomfortable looks. A senator near the front whispered something under his breath, while another man shook his head impatiently. To them, Maya was just another poor black kid who had wandered too close to wealth and power. Richard extended his hand toward the folded note Emily still held tightly. "Give me the paper." Emily handed it over silently. Richard unfolded the page beneath the ballroom lights. His eyes moved quickly across the handwritten warning. Then his jaw tightened almost invisibly. Victor stepped closer with a practiced smile. "You cannot seriously believe this." Richard looked up slowly. "Clause 8, he said quietly. Victor's expression barely shifted, but it shifted enough. Emily saw it immediately. A flicker. 1 second of panic hidden behind expensive confidence. Richard turned toward his legal team near the signing table. "Open the acquisition draft. Now." The room instantly erupted into movement. Attorneys hurried forward flipping pages while reporters pushed closer against the velvet ropes. Maya remained perfectly still beside the security guard, her fingers curled tightly around the edge of the silver serving tray. Across the ballroom, one of the lawyers suddenly stopped turning pages. His forehead creased. "Sir." The older attorney adjusted his glasses carefully. "Clause 8 transfers all unresolved international liability directly to Whitmore Holdings." The room fell silent again. Victor immediately stepped in. "That is standard language." "No." Another attorney interrupted nervously. "No, it is not." Richard's face hardened as he grabbed the contract himself. The overhead lights reflected sharply against the black ink while he scanned the paragraph line by line. Emily watched her father's breathing slow. That always happened when he was angry. Controlled. Dangerous. Near the back of the ballroom, Maya lowered her eyes briefly toward the marble floor. For a moment, she looked less like a brave young girl and more like a frightened child standing alone inside a room full of strangers. Then Richard spoke again without looking up from the contract. "How did you know about this?" Maya's voice came quietly. "Because my father found the same language hidden in another deal before he died." Victor Kane's smile vanished completely. Victor Kane recovered quickly, but not completely. The polished confidence that had carried him through decades of billion-dollar negotiations now looked thinner beneath the ballroom lights. He loosened one cuff slightly and forced out a quiet laugh. "Richard, you are allowing a frightened little girl to derail an international acquisition." Richard Whitmore did not look at him. His eyes remained fixed on the contract spread across the signing table while attorneys whispered urgently around him. The soft music that had filled the ballroom earlier had stopped completely. Even the catering staff stood frozen near the walls holding untouched trays of champagne. Maya Carter could feel every eye in the room pressing against her skin. Some curious, some irritated, some openly suspicious. A woman in diamonds near the front shook her head slowly. "This is exactly why children should not be allowed into private events," she muttered to her husband. Maya lowered her gaze for a second, fingers tightening around the silver tray in her hands. She had heard comments like that her entire life. Poor black girl. Wrong place. Wrong room. Wrong people. But tonight she stayed where she was. Emily Whitmore stepped away from the stage and walked toward Maya through the silent crowd. Her expensive heels clicked sharply against the marble floor. Up close, Emily noticed details she had missed before. The tiny tear near the seam of Maya's uniform sleeve. The faint ink stains on her fingertips. The exhaustion hiding beneath eyes that had clearly not slept much recently. "How old are you?" Emily asked softly. 13. Emily blinked in surprise. Maya seemed older somehow. Not in appearance, but in the way she carried herself, like someone who had spent years learning how to survive disappointment quietly. "Why are you doing this?" Emily asked. Maya hesitated before answering. "Because my father tried to warn people too. Nobody listened to him either." Across the ballroom, Richard finally looked up from the contract. "Victor," he said calmly, "why is there a secondary offshore liability transfer buried inside Clause 8? Victor spread his hands smoothly. "It protects both companies during federal review." One attorney cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, with respect, it does not protect both companies equally." Richard's face darkened slightly. "Explain." The attorney swallowed hard beneath the pressure of dozens of watching executives. "If future investigations uncover financial misconduct tied to international shell accounts, Whitmore Holdings assumes full legal exposure while Kane International remains insulated." A sharp silence followed. Emily slowly turned toward Victor. You were going to let my father sign this. Victor's jaw tightened. Your father was fully represented by counsel. Richard suddenly closed the contract binder with a hard snap that echoed across the ballroom. Several reporters immediately began whispering into phones. Camera flashes exploded again near the stage. Maya watched Richard carefully. She expected anger, maybe humiliation, but what appeared on his face instead looked dangerously close to fear. Real fear. The kind, powerful men spent their entire lives hiding. Then Richard asked the question that changed the atmosphere completely. Your father, he said slowly, looking directly at Maya. What was his name? Maya swallowed once. Daniel Carter. The color drained from Richard Whitmore's face almost instantly. Emily looked at her father in confusion. You know that name? Richard stared at Maya like he was suddenly seeing a ghost standing beneath the chandelier light. His voice came out quieter this time. Less like a billionaire. More like a man remembering something he wished he could forget. Daniel Carter was one of my senior financial analysts. Maya nodded slowly. Yes, sir, she whispered. And 3 days before he died, he tried to warn you too. The temperature inside the ballroom seemed to drop 10 degrees after Maya spoke her father's name. Richard Whitmore stood motionless beside the signing table, one hand still resting against the closed contract binder, while old memories surfaced behind his eyes like shadows rising through water. Daniel Carter. He had not heard that name spoken aloud in years. Around him, the ballroom remained silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the distant clink of melting ice inside untouched champagne glasses. Emily looked between her father and Maya in confusion. Dad, she said quietly. Who was he? Richard did not answer immediately. His jaw tightened once before he finally spoke. He was brilliant. The words came low and rough, almost reluctant. One of the smartest analysts I ever hired. Maya's fingers trembled slightly around the serving tray, but she kept her chin lifted. He tried to warn your company about hidden offshore transfers connected to Kane International. Victor Kane exhaled sharply through his nose. This is absurd. Richard, you cannot seriously allow a child to drag your company into conspiracy theories during a live signing event. Richard slowly turned toward him. The controlled calm in his face looked colder now. More dangerous. Did you know Daniel Carter? Victor shrugged smoothly. I met hundreds of employees over the years. Maya shook her head immediately. You knew him? Several guests turned toward her again. The security guard beside her loosened his stance slightly, no longer certain whether he was guarding the room from Maya or protecting Maya from the room. Richard narrowed his eyes. What makes you say that? Maya swallowed hard before answering. Because my father kept records. Victor's expression shifted for half a second. Tiny, almost invisible, but Emily saw it. Richard saw it too. Maya slowly placed the silver serving tray onto a nearby table and reached into the pocket of her catering apron. Every movement felt painfully loud inside the silent ballroom. When she pulled out the small flash drive, several reporters immediately raised their cameras higher. This was hidden inside my father's toolbox, Maya said softly. My grandmother found it last month after our apartment building flooded. Richard stared at the drive without moving. What is on it? Maya hesitated. Her voice became smaller this time, more vulnerable. He said if anything ever happened to him, somebody important needed to see it. Victor stepped forward instantly. Richard, this has gone far enough. But Richard held out his hand toward Maya without taking his eyes off the flash drive. Give it to me. The ballroom lights reflected against the tiny piece of metal resting in Maya's palm. For a brief moment, she looked uncertain. Not because she feared Richard Whitmore, but because she understood what happened after secrets reached powerful people. Her father had learned that lesson already. Slowly, she walked toward the stage. Her worn shoes barely made sound against the polished marble floor, while cameras flashed around her from every direction. Some guests leaned away as she passed. Others stared openly, their expressions caught somewhere between judgment and fascination. A little black catering girl now stood at the center of the most important financial event of the year. Maya finally stopped in front of Richard and placed the flash drive into his hand. The billionaire looked down at it silently. Such a small object. Small enough to fit inside a child's pocket. Small enough to destroy empires. Emily noticed her father's fingers tighten slightly around it. Then Richard looked toward his head attorney. Set up a private screen in the conference room upstairs. Victor immediately stepped closer. "You are making a mistake." Richard turned slowly toward him. "No," he said quietly. "I think the mistake was ignoring Daniel Carter the first time." The private conference room on the 32nd floor felt nothing like the glittering ballroom below. The music was gone. The applause was gone. Up here, only the low hum of fluorescent lighting and the sound of rain tapping against the massive glass windows filled the silence. Richard Whitmore stood at the head of the long oak table while his legal team gathered nervously around the mounted screen. Emily sat beside him, arms folded tightly across her chest. Maya remained near the doorway, still wearing the black catering uniform that suddenly looked painfully out of place among tailored suits and polished leather briefcases. Victor Kane stayed near the far end of the room, calm on the surface but noticeably quieter now. Richard placed the flash drive onto the table. No one moved for several seconds. Then he looked toward his attorney. "Play it." The screen flickered once before an old video appeared. Grainy, dark, recorded late at night inside what looked like a small office. A younger man sat in front of the camera wearing a wrinkled dress shirt with rolled sleeves. His tired eyes locked directly into the lens. Maya's breathing caught softly beside the door. "Dad," she whispered under her breath. Daniel Carter looked exhausted in the recording, but determined. Papers covered the desk around him in messy stacks while a desk lamp cast sharp shadows across his face. "If you are watching this," he began quietly, "then something probably happened to me." The conference room went completely still. Richard's expression hardened as he stared at the screen. Daniel continued speaking. "Victor Kane has been hiding fraudulent transfers through offshore shell corporations tied to future acquisition deals. He is burying federal liability inside secondary clauses where nobody thinks to look." One attorney beside Richard slowly removed his glasses, visibly shaken. On screen, Daniel held up several printed documents toward the camera. "I tried reporting this internally," he said. "But every time I got close, files disappeared. Meetings were canceled. People stopped returning calls." Maya lowered her eyes toward the carpet. Emily glanced at her quietly, noticing the way the girl's fingers twisted tightly together near her apron pockets. Daniel exhaled heavily in the video before continuing. "If Richard Whitmore ever signs a merger agreement involving Kane International, his company will absorb every legal consequence while Victor walks away clean." Victor suddenly stepped forward. "This proves nothing." Richard raised one hand without looking away from the screen. Silence. Daniel leaned closer to the camera. His voice dropped lower now, more personal. "Richard trusted me once. I hope he still remembers that." Richard's jaw tightened sharply. Rain streaked down the windows behind him while the city lights blurred across the glass like distant stars. "I stayed late 3 nights in a row trying to fix this quietly because I believed good companies deserved honest people protecting them." Daniel paused briefly. "But honest people disappear too easily around men like Victor Kane." Victor's composure cracked for the first time. "This is insanity," he snapped. "You are watching accusations from a paranoid employee recorded years ago." But nobody answered him. Nobody even looked at him anymore. Every eye remained fixed on the screen. Daniel reached forward slowly and turned the camera slightly toward another stack of documents beside